Welcome everyone to Keep Up with Pryme. My name is Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global, and together with Aske Holz, product manager at Pryme Global, we will walk you through our past release, which has been probably one of the biggest ones for the Pryme apps so far. So we have many new things we would like to show you. That's why I'm going to start right away with advanced projects. Here, you now have the option to preview postings to project, time, and expense journals. There's a new version. Sorry? Did anyone say something? No. You can now compare by price in the budget comparison. And we have added new fields in the work in progress related entries. We have the work in progress base amount and the work in progress percent complete. Moving forward to Pryme Time, our time tracking application. This is what I would consider the icing on the cake for this release, because we have integrated Copilot into Pryme Time. And now you can use Copilot to help you rewrite your descriptions in timesheets, in time tracking entries, and also in the invoice suggestion. Apart from this, you can use all-day Outlook events in order to create time tracking entries. And moreover, we have also added new options for time rounding in timesheets in order to make your timekeeping more flexible and customizable. We remind you that you have the option of using 3 months Pryme Time for free. And we really encourage you to try it out, because you will see the difference in terms of timesheet procrastination. Moving forward to Pryme Fund Management. Now there's the action to release unused funds, and this action reduces the reservation amounts to the posted usage, posting the difference. And finally, Pryme Matters. It's here where we have seen the biggest update yet, mainly in terms of Matter billing application enhancements. So now it's possible to invoice directly from the Matters to Invoice list. This page, which used to be called Invoice Creation List, now has also 2 new fact boxes. Apart from this, there are new and improved invoicing statuses, being the new ones invoice approved and invoice rejected. There's also the option to synchronize invoice descriptions, and you can create a single document which includes invoice and specification. The approval status now tracks the progress of invoices through review and approval stages. And when clicking on request review or request approval, an email notification is sent to the reviewer or to the approval. The draft invoices list is filtered by views such as in process, rejected, and approved. And we have simplified the invoice review page. Last but not least, you can now view invoicing instructions on posted sales invoices. As you can see, many new application enhancements we would like to demo. That's why I'm going to hand over the presentation to Aske, who will show you all these new enhancements, and we'll see each other at the end of the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And let's dive right into it with advanced projects. So first off, we have preview postings, then we will look at budget comparison, and lastly, some WIP-related changes. So let's start off with the preview posting. This is added in a number of journals. That's a time journal, project journal, and expense journal. So when you have a journal before posting, you can select to do a preview posting to see what entries will be created, similar to what you would see in a general journal and other places like invoices, etc. So giving you a preview possibility. On the budget side, we have a new feature on projects where we can look at budget comparison. That is an existing report that we've had for a long time, where we can compare different budget versions. And running this, I now have an additional option. Not only can I compare two budget versions by cost, but I can also compare them by price and get a preview of what the differences are and what the outcome is in terms of budget versus actual, but now based on the pricing. There is also an additional enhancement where we will also include parts that are not time and material, but fixed price instead. So that is also included in the budget comparison. And now it says budget price comparison because I'm comparing by price. Lastly, on the WIP side of things, we have a new set of fields that are added to entries created when posting WIP. So on this project, if I open up the project card, I've already calculated my WIP for this one. So I have a number of WIP entries. On these entries, we have a new set of fields for the WIP base amount, the WIP entry amount, and the WIP percentage. In this case, we can see the base was 100, the WIP percentage was 80, so that's why the WIP entry amount is coming out to 80, because of course 80% of 100 is 80. So it makes it a little bit easier to see why we're getting the amounts we're getting by including the base and the percentage completed. We will also see that on the general ledger entries created by this, there is a new description that includes those parts. So we can see here that this is actually in the description, base amount, and the completion percent. So it becomes very clear why we have the amounts we have. That concludes the changes for advanced projects. Next up, we have Pryme Time, where we have some major changes. First off, the enhanced descriptions with Copilot. Then we'll look a bit of time tracking changes, and lastly, the rounding. So in Copilot, in time tracking and other places, we have descriptions, of course. They could be short descriptions, long descriptions, but they are essential to getting paid for the work you are doing, especially in time material cases. So let's start off with invoice suggestions. It's one of the common cases where I could open up a project and look at what we have to invoice, say, this is good, we can invoice, but these descriptions, I'm not sure the customer will pay with these short descriptions. Can we do something to improve them? Yes, we can. We can select one of them or multiple. And now there is a Copilot action here, improve descriptions. It will try to look at the descriptions, the project, etc., and improve the descriptions to something more informative. So instead of test QA, it says perform testing and quality assuring activities to ensure the ERP, etc., etc. So it's a much fuller text. Now, it's of course inferring things, looking at the project description, the task description, and trying to guess what a better description could be, but at least it could be a starting point. And if you have a longer description, but there are some grammatical errors, it'll also correct that and try to make it align to some common guidelines. I can then either say, yes, let's keep it, or I could say, well, this one, conducting a meeting with John Smith, maybe that wasn't a better description. I just want to keep it short. So I'll unselect that, and then it will not use that description. So it'll just take these and keep the existing ones. And of course, I can adjust the descriptions manually after that. If you want to affect how it's doing its suggestions, you can fine tune it by going into the Pryme Time setup and adding additional Copilot assistant instructions here. I gave it instructions of not including names and numbers of projects and tasks. I also said it always include names of persons from the original description. So we have a quite long set of instructions to the Copilot on what it should do and what it shouldn't do. But you can add additional instructions in here. You could also add instructions about your area of business or anything else that is relevant to keep the right tone, keep it funny, keep it formal, avoid certain phrases or words. You can include that in there as well. This can be used from invoice suggestions. It can also be used at the time of time entry. So if I open up a timesheet, I can use it on my timesheet lines the exact same way. I can select one entry, I can select multiple entries, and I can say improve descriptions. And again, it'll try to improve the description. Now I selected one, and instead of specification version 1.2, it tries to embellish that to something more full. Lastly, you can also use it from your time tracking entries exactly the same way. Select your description, one or multiple lines, and ask it to improve them. And you hopefully get a better description based on that. So instead of QA part 2, it says perform quality assurance on part 2 of the project, ensuring all specification requirements were met. That's probably a better description. Is it perfect? No. You're still in charge. You can make changes and adjust it as you want. We would very much like to have some feedback on these descriptions. Is there something that it in general does wrong, something it could do better? We do not have any insights to what the Copilot is doing with your data. We do not get your descriptions and see what comes out of it. So we cannot do improvements based on your expectations. We, of course, do our own testing, but we are reliant on real actual cases coming back to us saying, here are some cases where we could instruct the Copilot better. So we are thankful for any feedback you can give in that area. I see we have a question on the Copilots and how they are activated. They should be activated by default, but it depends a bit on how old the version of BC is. At some point, I think it defaults to activating new versions. If they are not activated, you can go into the Copilot settings. So search for Copilots, and so you'll go to the Copilot and AI capabilities. And in here, it should show up as a new Copilot's capability. In this case, the improved descriptions Copilot by Pryme, and you can decide in this case to deactivate or activate it. And if you deactivate, we ask for a reason. Why did you deactivate it? But this should be the place to activate this. Small thing of notice is that currently this is a preview function, meaning we do not guarantee the correctness of what it is doing. And also, you have to be aware that data might leave your data region. So we cannot guarantee the data stays within the country you're in. It will stay within the EU, but we cannot guarantee what country it stays in. So it might send out that data to an Azure data center in another EU country for processing and send it back. Nobody can look at it, but if you have issues with data ownership and so on, that's to know. The data is never at rest at any other point, but it will transfer through other EU countries. Lastly, on Pryme Time, we also had actually for the time tracking calendar, we have a new feature. Last time I showed the opportunity to look at your Outlook calendar in here, click something, and it will create a time tracking entry. What we added this time is also the ability to do this for all-day events. The difference being that if I add an all-day event I probably don't want it to be 24 hours. So here it will prompt me to put in when I actually started this and when I ended this. So I have something that is a meaningful all day. And of course, on the time tracking, on the time sheets, we also have the new rounding feature where you can round your time. In my case, I've set it up to round to the nearest quarter of an hour. So if I enter a quantity in here and say I worked 1.1 hours, it rounds that off. Now I decided that it should not round the quantity itself, but it should round the value to invoice, which in this case becomes 1 hour and a quarter. I can control this, what it rounds and how it rounds, again from Pryme Time setup. And within Pryme Time setup, I defined if the rounding is applied automatically, or there's no rounding, or the user has to confirm the rounding. And I can also decide if this applies only to the quantity to invoice or both the quantity and the quantity to invoice. So that can be quite useful if you have a business practice of always invoicing in certain increments of time, that being 6-minute increment, 15-minute increment, half-hour increments. You can set it up in here. That concludes the Pryme Time part of this. So we are now into Pryme Fund Management. Pryme Fund Management has one new feature this release. This is releasing on unused funds. When we're using Pryme Fund Management, we have our fund allocations. And on our fund allocations, we reserve an amount of funding to that project, and then later we use that money. But when we get to the end of the project, we probably want to release the amount that we have reserved but not yet used. And for this, there is now an action in here to release unused funds. It is also activated from the project whenever you complete that project. So you don't have amounts reserved that are left on that project. So I can go in and I can select release unused funds, and it will reduce my reserved amount exactly to my used amount, and it will post that as well. So now there is nothing unused left. And the big topic of today, Pryme Matters, where we have some major enhancements on the invoicing process. The invoicing process has been changed in a number of ways. It does not have any breaking changes. So if you're already using the existing invoice creation process, you can keep using the same processes as you have today. There are a few fields that have been moved, but nothing is taken away. You can still use it with the same features, and you can then choose to activate some of the new features if you want to. So looking at this, the page that was previously called invoice creation is now called matters to invoice. So this is my list of matters to invoice. One major change, we added a invoice until field at the top here. So it's easy to set a filter where you want the cutoff of the calculation and what you want to post to the invoice. So in my case, I might want to set this to the end of last month. Then it will filter to that, and it will only create invoices with entries, including up until that date. I also get some new fact boxes. I get a fact box for posted document. So this is a history of previous invoices that I can easily see. There are invoicing details in here, so I can see some more information about a contract and hours and open timesheets. Maybe this should have been posted and should be included. Are we doing some customer split? Do we have client funds? What is the total expense amount? What is the time amount? Are we going to invoice in a foreign currency? Do we have discounts, etc.? So a lot of extra information in here. On the line level, not much has changed it's basically the same fields. We changed a little bit on how we show the total. So we now call this accumulated to invoice because it is what accumulates until this date. And then we show the total amount on sales documents. I can still go from here and go in and look at my details. And this is essentially the same view as you had before. In here, we haven't made any changes. So this is still all the same. I can go in, I can say create invoice. Nothing has changed here really. Well, except for the improved descriptions, of course. But if I don't want to go in and look at the details, but just want to go through this list quickly and generate some invoices because I know there's a good filter in here and maybe somebody will review the invoices afterwards, I can simply go ahead and say create invoice, create invoice, create invoice, create invoice, etc. And so we can see that this is now being created in the background. So I don't have to wait to get a new screen up where I can select create invoice and I have to wait for it. It will simply do it as I'm working, going through my list. And we can see that it is now creating the invoice. It has created the invoices here, and I can get directly to these. There is also a link to a draft invoice. So by default, it will create a document as a PDF that you can review immediately. So I can just open this up and I get an invoice to review. So this is a draft invoice. And if there is an invoice specification set up for this as well, then that will be included on that as well. So it will combine the different documents that you have associated with the invoice. I can, of course, also go in and open up the document and look at that just as before. This is a regular invoice with all that we are used to. From here, I can also go in and look at the combined draft PDF. So I can open this one up. It's the same that I got from the list. So it's an easier way to quickly get to that PDF, and it will regenerate it with any changes that you have made. Next thing is a new review and approval process. So we have added an approval menu. This is separate from the Business Central approval workflows. So this is a separate lightweight approval function, which has two distinct parts. There is a review part and an approval part. Now, I have not activated the approval. We'll have a look at that in just a minute. But in this setup, I'm only using the review part. The idea of the review is that you can send something for review without the person giving explicit approval. So in my case, for an invoice for a matter, I might want to send out the invoice for a review by the matter responsible. And so I can select request review, and I can select who should review this. I can select this either by selecting the reviewer directly from my list, or I can select it by role and say I would like it to be reviewed by whoever is responsible for this matter. In this case, it's Prakash, so I say OK, and it will send out an email for review, which will show up in my mailbox. And so I can open up that email, comes here. So for invoice 102292, yes, this is that one. I have that draft attached, so I can have a look at it and see, does it look nice? And if it looks nice and everything is okay, I can also look at some details down here. I can then say approve now, or I can say reject. Or I could say, yes, it's almost okay, but there's some things I would like to review and adjust. So I click the review and adjust. It opens up Business Central for me, and it opens up with a simplified page. which has less details than the regular sales invoice. So it's not so cluttered. What we show in here are the lines and also the lines that were not included on this invoice. So I had some things that were decided not to be on this invoice. So I can see, why are they not there? Maybe they should be included. Was that a mistake, or is there a reason for them not being included? And I can do some minor corrections. So I can go in and change the descriptions. And one of the special features here is that I can expand these lines so I can see the details of the groups immediately under, and I can make changes in here. So maybe this needs a better description. Maybe this quantity is wrong. We cannot charge for that fully. So without having to go in underline options, etc., I can do it directly in here and make direct changes to this. Still when being in review. Then when I'm satisfied, I can approve that review. And now it is in review approved. That means that the invoice here now also gets an approval status of review approved. And if we look at the list out here, we will see that the status of this one, if we expand the invoicing status, we can see it's still as invoice created, not posted, because there is only been a review. We haven't done an actual approval. If we want to have an actual approval process with a hard requirement of approval of every invoice, we'll have to activate that first. I can do that in Pryme Matters setup, where I can turn on invoice approval. This is also the place where I can select a default reviewer or a default approver. So I could say the default reviewer is the matter responsible, but I don't know who the default approver is, or maybe that's a client responsible, or whatever model you have. But you can define a default in here based on the roles. So with this in place, let's go back to the document. And now we have the option to, or actually an obligation to send this for approval. So I must now send this for approval. It's not required to have a review before the approval, but there must be an approval before we can post this. So I'll request approval. I'll select again the matter responsible. There will be an email sent out, and I will open up that email as it comes in. That was here. And then I can go in, same things, approve, reject, review, and adjust. In this case, I'll select approve now. It says, are you sure you want to approve the invoice? Yes, I am sure I want to approve the invoice. And with that, that invoice is now released and can be posted. It's also locked down from changes. So even if I set it to be allowing changes, if somebody goes in and says, well, actually, we would like to make some changes here and change the price, they will not be allowed to. We are having a very hard lock on anything that is approved that is not open for change. If you want to have a look at who approved what, then you can review the approval log, where you can see all the status changes from when it went from one status to another. And there could also be comments. The comments are added in the case you reject something. Then you're requested to add a comment to why this was rejected. So this is a new improved invoicing process. Again, there's nothing of this which is required. You can use it just as you would before. Yes, there's a new fact box. Yes, we moved a few columns around, but nothing has been taken away. So that's basically it. The last part is when we post this invoice. So let me post this invoice. We can see here before I post, I had some invoicing instructions. These invoicing instructions are now flowing to the posted invoice. So if anybody asks about, I'm sure there was an instruction, why didn't you follow that instruction? You can always look on the posted invoice and say, well, The invoicing instructions at that point in time were exactly that with this text. No more, no less. I followed the instructions. There were no instructions to do otherwise. And that's all I had for today.